Thank you so much for you all coming, on this Thursday afternoon during lunchtime. Happy Black History Month to all of you all. I know you've seen a myriad of things going on from the DEI area, and we are excited to kind of close out the month with a now dear friend of mine, Kevin Powell, who is just going to talk about diversity one-on-one and kind of how the leadership is on us, that we're the ones waiting to be the leadership. And so I just want to give a brief bio, but I'm sure Kevin Powell will go into detail about that. But he is one of the most acclaimed political, cultural, literary, and hip hop voices in America today. He's a native of Jersey City. He was raised by a single mother in extreme poverty, but managed to study at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, thanks to the New Jersey's Educational Opportunity Fund. Kevin has gone on to be the author of 12 books, including his
Uh-oh,
newest title.
that's the
uh,
wrong bio.
oh no! Okay, so how many books, Kevin, at this point?
Well, it's 14, but you don't actually even have to read it. I'm actually embarrassed whenever the bios are read. Um,
Oh no. Okay, so lots and lots of books, just so you all know.
I'm just excited to be here with all the Kevins.
That's right. He's a pop culture curator. He produced the first exhibit on the history of hip hop in America at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio, which toured American overseas. As a humanitarian, Kevin's work includes local, national, and international initiatives to end violence against women and girls, including a very well regarded appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show, highlighting domestic violence. And he has done extensive philanthropic and relief work ranging from Hurricane Katrina to earthquakes in Haiti, Japan, to the Superstorm Sandy in New York. And a myriad of others. And so, as an acknowledgement of Kevin's life of public service and his dedication to the literature and the arts, Cornell University recently became the owner of the Kevin Powell Collection, documenting nearly 30 years of his work today in print, photos, videos, books, handwritten notes, speeches, and select memorabilia. And, I don't know if you all know about Kevin, but he has just done some awesome, awesome work over the years. And it's truly a pleasure to introduce Kevin to you all this afternoon.
Thank you, and I forgive me for interrupting.
It's fine.
I was texting that the internet is a funny place, isn't it? As I was listening to, it, I was like, wow, that bio's from like 5 or 6 years ago. But honestly, more importantly, I just am thankful for the opportunity. I'm honored to be here with you all, Gas South. I want to certainly thank the DEI team, Valentina, Aisha. Thank you so much, Mr. Barry, Kevin, and the CEO, Kevin, Mr. CEO. Is it Grinner or Griner?
You got it right the second time there. Griner.
Grinner. Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Griner. Yep.
Griner. I'm sorry. You
Yes.
said the second time. Sorry about that. And just thank you all for having me. It's just my honor to be here. And the reason why I asked if I could see folks is because, I mean, you all know what's happening in the world with COVID and the pandemic. And prayerfully, we're going to get through this year. I hope. I always thought it was going to be 2 years given what happened in 1918, 1919 in our country and around the world with that past pandemic. But I'm just happy to see you all. It's an honor. Thank you for even asking me, Mr. Barry. Thank you so much. I'm just Kevin. I've been blessed to write 14 books. I was especially happy to hear about this company. And I've been to Georgia many times, to Florida many times, so I know what Gas South is. My entire family's from South Carolina. I'm a New Yorker, but my mom, everyone's from the South. And so I have a deep love for the South. I just need to say that. In fact, one of my speeches this week was about African American Southern heritage at an exhibit and museum in Ohio. But I want to jump right into this, and I hope Valentina and Mr. Barry, we can also hear people ask questions after I'm done. Is that right? Well,
Yep,
okay,
absolutely.
okay,
So everyone feel free to use the chat function, and we will get to the Q&A portion in the second half.
okay, awesome. Well, a few things first and foremost, since we're talking about diversity 101, the leadership we are waiting for is us. I just want to start by saying I love people. I love all people. I love all people. I've been blessed to travel to all 50 states in our country in America. I've been blessed to travel to 5 to 7 continents, in spite of the fact that I didn't even get on a plane until I was 24 years old, just because of the crazy poverty that I grew up in. And I didn't even know that I could actually get on a plane, to be really honest about it. And what it's done for me, honestly, is expanded my horizons in ways I couldn't even imagine. And I've also been blessed to drive across the country, actually from Atlanta to California. That's the route we took back in the day. And so I said it to say, it's important for me to say up front, no matter how you identify yourself, whatever your identities are, I don't care if someone's a liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, really, what kind of human being are we? What kind of human being are you? What kind of human beings do we want to be? Do we want to be bridge builders or do we want to be bridge destroyers? I want to start there, and I want to also not assume that everyone knows what Black History Month is and where it came from. Just like we're about to start celebrating Women's History Month next week, starting March 1st. Dr. Carter G. Woodson was someone who didn't get his high school diploma until he was in his 20s, an African American man, over 100 years ago, we're talking about. But he studied by kerosene lamp as he worked by day. He studied at night, and he got his high school diploma, and he went on to get a PhD, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He wrote many, many scholarly articles and books. His most famous book was called The Miseducation of the Negro, The Miseducation of the Negro. Well, there was a famous singer who won 8 Grammys many years later named Lauryn Hill, who created an album called The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Well, where did Lauryn Hill get that title from? The Miseducation of the Negro. We know that Carter G. Woodson also created Negro History Week, because that's how Black folks were referred back then in 1926. In 1926, he picked February not because it was the shortest month of the year, but because two people who were very much considered heroes to Black people in America at that time were born in February. One was Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery in the state of Maryland. He literally taught himself how to read and write, and with the help of young white male friends who he would sometimes give some bread to just so they could give him some words that he could master. He escaped from slavery, and Frederick Douglass became one of the most dynamic leaders of the 1800s. And a lot of people don't know this. Frederick Douglass was the most photographed American in the entire century of the 1800s, the 19th century. The other person born in February was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. Because we know that Mr. Lincoln was not only just the 16th president of the United States, but the Civil War happened during his administration. We know that he passed one of the most famous documents in American and world history, put forth, I should say, the Emancipation Proclamation, which I had the honor of holding in my hands, one of the original copies at Cornell University a few years ago. And I can't tell you what that felt like just to see the document in my hands. And we know that Abraham Lincoln was someone that Black people admired because he, quote unquote, freed the slaves, or enslaved people, I should say. Now, we know it's more complicated than that if we actually do a bit more digging about the history of the Civil War. But that's why February and Carter G. Woodson. And we know by 1976, because of the great civil rights movement of our country, which originated in the American South, where many of you, where you all are, led to Black History Month becoming a national commemoration in 1976, and it became known as Black History Month. So that's the history of it. But just as important, I need to say this to you all: Black history is American history. Black history is American history. Black history is American history. Jewish history is American history. Italian history is American history. Irish history is American history. Women's history is American history. LGBTQ plus is American history. Disabled history is American history. Poor people's history is American history. Latinx history is American history. Asian people's history is American history. Native American people's history is American history. What I'm saying to you all when we talk about diversity 101, the leadership we are waiting for is us, is that every single group of people, Muslims, Jews, Christians, atheists, agnostic, older, younger, no matter what their identities, everyone has contributed to this experiment, this social experiment that we call America. Everyone. No one is better than anyone else. No one is superior to anyone else. No one's history is more important than anyone else's. All of our histories matter. When I think about Black history, and I want you all to think about this, if you remove Black people from the conversation of what is America, what has been from the very beginning, you oftentimes won't have basic American dishes. If you don't believe me, go watch a documentary on Netflix right now called High on the Hog. High on the Hog. It's about the history of Black food from Africa to America, and you begin to realize things that we take for granted as American food is actually food that was created and spread around by Black folks. Because as we were being enslaved people, who was preparing the food all over these plantations? Black folks. When we talk about the contributions of black folks, black folks, black folks. You can't go to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, without understanding that a black man who was a contemporary of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, named Benjamin Banneker, created the grid for Washington, D.C., or that it was black hands that actually built the White House, that actually built the nation's capital. When we talk about black folks, well, if you remove hip hop and soul and disco and jazz and blues and rock and roll, spirituals, and even country western, people don't even understand the contribution of black people to creation, the birth of country western music. And that's not to brag or boast. The reason why these things are important is because when I was growing up, my mother is from the South Carolina. We are proud Geechees from the low country of South Carolina. Yes, we are. I'm proud of it. When I was growing up, because she migrated, she was part of the migration, the great migration we hear about in American history of black folks moving from the American South to New York, to New Jersey, where I was born, to Chicago, going out west to California, to the Bay Area, to LA. When she moved to New Jersey, my mother did the best she could as a single black woman. Shout out to all the black women out there. Shout out to all the black women out there. She did the best she could with a grade school education. And why did my mother only have a grade school education? Because she was born into horrific poverty in South Carolina. And by the time she was 8 years old, she herself had to pick cotton. She and her three sisters and her brother and mother and father lived in a two-room shack in South Carolina. There was no electricity. There was no running water. They had to do whatever they had to do to survive. My grandfather, her father, was a sharecropper, which means he didn't own the land. He worked the land for someone else, and he had to give a part of what he earned every year to someone else. My grandmother was the quote unquote help, and literally they were teaching the girls that that's what they had to do as well. And so not only did my mother have to deal with racism growing up as a little black girl in America at that time, but she had to deal with sexism and classism as well. And it's important for us to understand that this is not some foreign country we're talking about. This is our stories. This is our stories. This is our stories. This is a part of the American story. My mother had an eighth grade education because her education was interrupted over and over again. My grandmother, her mother, could not read or write. Yet here's the son, me, Kevin, author of 14 books. I just finished my 15th book, a poetry book that's coming in the fall. And next year, I'm publishing my 16th book, which will be a biography of Tupac Shakur, someone who I knew very well when he was alive. I was actually in Vegas when he died. And what I'm saying to you, just the fact that I am able to do this, I do not take for granted, given where I come from. Given where I come from. You know what I mean? And so I also know my mother did the best she could by sending me to the best public schools in Jersey City where I went to school. But if I'm honest about it, my 13 years of education from kindergarten through the 12th grade, 13 years, I was an A student because my mother pushed me hard, learn math, learn science, read. She did the best she could. By the time I was in the 4th or 5th grade, my mother couldn't even help me with my schoolwork because she didn't know what the work was. But what my mother didn't realize is that in my 13 years of school, here I was, a black boy, a black male coming of age in America. And I was lucky if black history, black culture, black contributions to anything was a full page, my 13 years of an education, a full page. I knew that black people had been slaves, quote unquote, enslaved people. I heard about Dr. King having a dream because that was mentioned a lot. You heard about Rosa Parks. You might have heard about Jackie Robinson. And that was the totality of the contributions of black people to America. Nothing about the fact that you can't talk about any war, from the Revolutionary War all the way up to recent efforts where black people have always been in the military, black people have always been athletes, black people have always been scientists, mathematicians, writers, the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, the Black Arts Movement of the 1960s. I learned about none of that. Why is that important when we're talking about diversity? Because if you're black or Latinx or Jewish or Italian or disabled or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or poor, of any background, if you're Muslim, if you are any identities and you don't see yourself in your education, it's likely that what happened to me has happened or will happen to you. You won't think that you're valuable. You won't think that you actually have a life of substance. You will actually do what Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History Month, said in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro. Your self-esteem will be so low that even if there's no back door, you'll go create the back door, you know? And it's not just about Black folks here. I'm certainly talking about Black History Month, but we're about to celebrate Women's History Month. I mean, how is it that I can go to school, kindergarten to the 12th grade, and all I learned about women of any race, it doesn't matter if they were white, Black, Latinx, Native American, Indigenous people, Asian, didn't matter. How is it that I only learned that Betsy Ross sold a flag and that Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat on the bus? And then I kind of vaguely hear about Helen Keller. I kind of vaguely hear about Madame Curie. Now, why is this important? It's important because if we don't learn about ourselves, and I'm looking at the beautiful diversity on the screen right now, if we don't learn about ourselves, we're not going to like ourselves. I would argue that we're not going to love ourselves, and we're not going to love people who look like us. And if we don't learn about people who are different than us, it becomes more likely for us to become racist or sexist or homophobic or transphobic or classist or anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, just hate people because of their difference, anti-Asian, all of it. And so I'm saying to you all, I hated myself completely in spite of being an A student from the time I was a little boy until I got to college, because I just didn't know. I had no clue who I was. I thought my community, excuse me, contributed nothing other than maybe we were athletes and entertainers. Nothing. You know, Mr. Berry's from the great state of Mississippi. Am I right, Mr. Berry? You know, and think about the rich. You can't talk about the civil rights movement without talking about Mississippi. I didn't know who Fannie Hamer was. I had no idea about anything that was happening in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. We were taught nothing. I'm literally born right at the end of the civil rights movement, and my education excluded the entire civil rights movement. I want y'all to think about that for a second. Other than Dr. King having a dream and him being assassinated, that's all I knew. Think about that for a second. And so this is not just about Black people. This is about all of us. Because I'm going to say to you all, I've been to countries like Wales in the United Kingdom, majority white country. And I was there to celebrate a few years back the centennial of a great writer, Welsh writer named Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas was such a great writer that Bob Dylan, the legendary Bob Dylan, was so impacted by his writings that he took his name. Bob Dylan was born Robert Zimmerman, a Jewish brother born in Minnesota. He took the name Dylan as his first name because he was that influenced. I mean, as his last name because he was that impacted by Dylan Thomas. When I was in Wales, I noticed that there were signs in Welsh and there were signs in English. Follow me for a second. I became curious, so I started asking Welsh people, why is it that you have signs in English and also in Welsh? Because Wales is a part of the United Kingdom, and the British speak English, or the folks in England speak English. They said, well, we were very impacted by what Black people were doing in places like Mississippi, Mr. Berry, during the Civil Rights Movement, and it impacted us so much as they started talking about their culture and their pride that we decided we wanted to hold on to our culture and pride here in Wales. Blew my mind. 2013, I also had the great honor to go to Japan for the first time as a representative of our government. The State Department sent me. Why did I go to Japan in 2013? It was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. So I had to go around to different communities in Japan and talk about, the significance of that speech, the struggles around democracy in our country. And guess what, you all? The Japanese knew more about our history than we do. It blew my mind. And so when you have people fighting about what should and should not be taught, I'm saying to you all, it actually makes us better citizens. It makes us better citizens. If I, as a New Yorker, I'm a Brooklyn person, right? But I would never come to Georgia or Florida or any parts of the South without making an effort to understand, what is this community? What is the history of this community? I need to be educated about this. I would never come to Gas South, as we're doing right now, and not look up, well, what is this company? Why is this company important to this part of the country? Does that make sense, you all? You know what I mean? I have a responsibility to educate myself, because that way I can be a bridge builder instead of a bridge destroyer and say things that are destructive or ignorant, or just be someone who's sitting on the sidelines when I could actually be a productive member of society and advance us forward. And so I'm going to end it here with a question that was raised by a native son of Georgia, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's my Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, brother. Alpha Phi Alpha is the oldest Black fraternity in the country, founded in 1906. Dr. King asked a profound question at the end of his life in the form of a book. The question was, where do we go from here? But that wasn't just the full question. It was, where do we go from here, colon, community or chaos? Community or chaos? Dr. King talked a lot about the beloved community in his life. This vision he had. You know, we always focus on the I Have a Dream speech, which is one of the greatest speeches ever made. We know that. But I always ask people, after August 28th, 1963, he lived for 5 more years. Do you know anything else about what he did after that? Do you know anything about the work that was happening? Do you know anything else about the civil rights movement? In other words, we have to hashtag read, study, travel. We have to hashtag read, study, travel. We have to hashtag read, study, travel. How can we call ourselves Americans and many of us don't know anything about basic American history? Hashtag read, study, travel. And when I realized Dr. King was asking the question, where do we go from here, community or chaos? He was saying that we could either go forward together or we can stay stuck fighting each other because of ignorance and fear and hatred, which all results in a profound kind of violence, physical violence, spiritual violence, emotional violence. You don't think so? I'm gonna put it to you all like this. Jewish people got killed because they were Jewish in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, just like Black folks got killed because they were Black folks in a church in South Carolina, just like Asian folks got killed because they were Asian in a spa in Georgia, just like Latinx folks got killed because they were Latinx in a shopping mall in Texas, just like LGBTQ plus people got killed because of who they were at a club in Florida. I don't know about you all, but I felt as much anguish. I'm a heterosexual, cisgendered, straight Black man. But I felt as much anguish when I heard the story about the Jewish folks in Pittsburgh, as the Asian folks in Georgia, as the queer folks in Florida, as the Latinx folks in Texas. Because I understand, to Dr. King's point, I believe in community. There's really only one group. It's called the human family, but all these things that have been created to separate from us from each other, and many of us unwittingly participate in it. And how does that apply to us who work in these spaces? We need to think about what we know, how we roll, because a lot of us think that our education stopped after we got out of high school, or if we were blessed to go to college, or I was blessed to go to college because of a program created through the civil rights movement. But actually, learning should be lifelong. That's the problem. That's the problem. Many of us stopped growing, or we never really grew in the first place. And so I just think that when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I look around and say, hey, if women are doing the same work as men, they should get equal pay, period. When I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, are these different types of folks in leadership positions with real influence inside of this space? When I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, community, or chaos, do people feel comfortable enough? Do they feel that this is a safe space, a non-judgmental space where they can say what they feel without fear of being penalized? As a Black man, what does that mean to me? It means that, hey, if I speak my mind, don't say that I'm quote unquote attacking you because I'm speaking my mind. As a Black man, what does that mean to me? Understand that between the time, I put on my clothes and happen to go outside, be it for work or some other activity, in my mind constantly is, am I going to get hurt in any way simply because of who I am, because of the fears of other people and their ignorance about me? Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, George Floyd in Minnesota, Trayvon Martin in Florida. Are y'all with me out there? And so we have to think about it like that. I really do love all people. I mean that. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. But I realized a long time ago that love is actually an action word, it's a verb, and you can't just do it by yourself. It's not love if it's not going back and forth, And so I really do have faith and hope. People, listen, y'all, I've done 10 speeches between Monday and today. I'm tired. You know what I'm saying? But I do the work that I do, and I've been doing it for over 30 years because I really, really, really am thankful that I'm someone who was able to overcome a lot of madness in my own life. No father there, the struggles of my mother, the poverty. Poverty is a form of violence, y'all. Poverty is a form of violence. I've been blessed to see things that a lot of people have not been able to see, but I'm like, what does it matter, my individual success, quote unquote, my resume, my CV, if I'm not using what I've been given to help other people? What is the point of this life if it's not for other people? And so I'm going to leave you all gas south with this. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when most of us are going to be gone, people are going to say, wow, in those early stages of the 21st century, there was a global pandemic. There was a whole lot of people shooting each other and killing each other. There was a whole lot of ugliness going around. And people are going to ask, might be a family member, what did that person do? What did you do when all this was happening? Did you do anything to try to take this in a different direction? Or did you just sit on the sidelines, taking up space? That's what I think about every single day. So I want to conclude there. I love all of you. I'm looking forward to the dialogue. Don't think that any question is not a great question. All questions are great questions. But this is what's on my heart right now as we go forward through this craziness of this world that we live in right now. I mean, waking up to seeing Russia attacking Ukraine, all the stuff that we have to deal with nationally, domestic, and internationally. What are we going to do? That's the question. What are we going to do? Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
And you all feel free to unmute yourself. I don't see anyone with their hands raised just yet, but feel free to unmute because I know Kevin really likes the engagement per se. So go ahead and go for it.
All right, I'll kick us off with a question.
Hey,
Kevin. So, I'm a father, and I've got an 11-year-old son. He's fortunate; he goes to a private school, and it's a very diverse. Um, uh, uh, he's kind of been sheltered to some extent, but he's got a very diverse group of classmates,
Yep.
and we've been very intentional as parents to try to encourage him to embrace the melting pot that we live in Atlanta, and I feel like the future generations, I've seen incremental improvements and how people treat others from different populations, different backgrounds. But like if you are trying to like tackle diversity, inclusion, and as a society problem, like what would be the one thing, like if we changed one thing, I think you're talking about education, like that's kind of where I feel like needs to be the starting point, because a lot of folks, by the time they're adults, they get very entrenched into their beliefs, and they're much harder to kind of change, right? My grandparents were kind of set in their ways. My parents seem like they've gotten a little bit more open-minded. I feel like you know things have improved, but like we talk about critical race theory that's been like turned into like a politicized topic, and it's really talking about an inclusive story that's not homogenized. Like, but I guess my original question stands, like if there's one thing that you would say needs to be tackled to keep things moving forward in a positive direction, what would it be?
Well, I think, Brother Camden, you actually answered your own question, education. But I think we got to take it out of the context of thinking it's just school. It's everything. Parents have got to play an integral role. I mean, look, as I said, I've been to ATL many times. There's a rich history in Atlanta, Georgia, for example. And I mean, I know for a fact there's folks of all different identities there. There's a Jewish community there, there's a Black community there, there's all kinds of communities there. But we have to be willing to make an effort to educate ourselves. What do we need to do? I think first and foremost, what I ask folks, I do these kind of sessions all the time. Well, who are you? Not asking you, Cam, this is a rhetorical question, but like a lot of people don't even know who they are. They'll say things like, well, I'm just Black, I'm just white. I'm like, well, what were you before you became just Black or just white? You know what I mean? Where did you come from? Do you have any vague idea where you may have come from? Do you know your history? Like I know my family, as I said earlier, are from South Carolina, and we really do have African American and Native American indigenous blood in us. You know, I learned a few years ago when I found my father's side of the family that my father's father was half black, half white. I didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? On my mother's side, I did the DNA. They come from Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. So that makes a lot of sense. They love rice in Guinea-Bissau and they love rice in South Carolina. I'm like, oh, you know what I mean? And so it actually helped to deepen my understanding of who I was, to learn these various parts of me. At the same time, I feel like I had a responsibility, you know, to do what the late great Dr. Bell Hooks, who just passed, has said many times in her lifetime. You know, have the courage to cross cultural boundaries, Camden. We have to have the courage to cross cultural boundaries. You know, like when I was growing up, for example, in Jersey City, mira, yo hablo español. El español muy importante to me. Well, how did he learn Spanish? Because my friends were Puerto Rican and Dominican and Cuban. And then as I got older, I started meeting folks who were Mexican, Guatemalan, Salvadorian. I have a profound love for Latinx culture, Latinx history, because of when I was a child, I would smell the food, arroz con pollo. I would hear the music, merengue, salsa. You know what I'm saying? And I was curious. And then also to the credit of TV when I was growing up, and anyone who's a Gen Xer, anyone over 40 will know what I'm talking about. Remember when we used to watch Sesame Street and Zoom and Electric Company? All those shows were diverse. And I didn't know that Zoom was intentionally diverse. I was like, wow. You know what I mean? Because they were saying that kids, like your son Camden, kids are less likely to fall into all of this craziness until they start to get older and like, okay, now I'm going to be they're not going to announce
I'm going to categorize myself.
Yeah. But we should be proud of who we are. Like, you know, if you're Italian, you should be proud to be Italian American. If you're Irish, you should be proud to be Irish. If you're Jewish, you should be proud to be Jewish. If you're black, you should be proud to be black. All of it. You know, Audre Lorde, one of our great writers, talked about, you know, being proud of our who we are, but also understanding that we're part of this bigger thing. And so what do you do with your son? Teach him who he is, Camden, in every way possible. But also, you know, since next month is Women's History Month, I'd be remiss not to say we also need to teach these boys that they can't be sexist and homophobic and transphobic and thinking that manhood is just violence and ego and just kind of destructive behavior, you know, either toward other quote unquote boys or males or toward women and girls. Do you know what I mean? Because I guarantee you in this session, there's someone who identifies as a woman who has had to deal with domestic violence or rape culture because of how men or boys, no matter what our race, have been socialized. Do you know what I'm saying? And so that's what I think we have to do. You know, he needs to learn women's history. I didn't learn it. He needs to learn, well, who is Evanism? What was the vagina monologue? What is their eyes were watching God? You know, I think, you know, let's make him a whole human being. That's like for me, Camden and everyone, first and foremost, I had to learn my history. I did a deep dive into African American, Afro-Caribbean, African history. Over time, I was like, okay, let me go back and start to think about the kids that I grew up with who were Jewish and Italian and Puerto Rican and Dominican, et cetera, Filipino, Chinese, all of that. And at a certain point, I was challenged and I was told, Kevin, here you are talking all this stuff about race, for example. You know absolutely nothing about half the world's population, half the country's population, women. I was like, word, I'm ignorant. And I was raised by women. And, you know, in Camden, and I'm just saying this too, I grew up an athlete. I love sports to this day. I love video games. You know, I love hardcore hip hop. I love grunge with Kurt Cobain and, you know, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all of that. But I realized I was also squashing part of who I was because ever since I was a kid, I was told that boys don't cry. Really? Ain't that something? I'm not allowed to show any emotions, or we would say sexist or homophobic stuff about boys who did express emotions. And so I squashed it. And what I realized, you know, where I'm at now, Camden and everyone, we're talking about diversity 101. I decided a while back, I want to be a whole human being. I'd like to be a whole human being. Yep, I love baseball, I love all football, basketball, whatever it is. I love sports, love video games still, but I also love poetry. You know, I love dance. I love classical music. What's wrong with that? You know what I mean? I love who I am as an African person. I'm an African. I'm an African. I'm an African. I'm real clear about who I am. But I also can appreciate, you know, if I can give you a historical example for a second about crossing boundaries, brother Camden, a Jewish brother I talked about earlier, Bob Dylan, was so affected by what black folks were doing in places like Mississippi, where Mr. Berry was from, that he wrote one of the greatest songs in American and world history. What was that song called? Blowing in the Wind. blowing in the wind. It's incredible poetry. A black man named Sam Cooke from Chicago was so affected by this Jewish brother's song, by this white brother's song, blowing in the wind, that he started performing it. And eventually it led Sam Cooke to write his own song, which became known as The Change Is Gonna Come. But imagine if Bob Dylan said, well, I'm white, I'm gonna stay over here, and Sam Cooke is gonna stay over here because I'm black. Y'all see where I'm going with this? That's all I got to say. That's why we have to educate our children to be whole human beings and see the beauty and the genius of all people equally. You know? Everyone all
Hey,
right up there?
Yeah.
So we actually have a question from Kevin Griner for you, Kevin.
Griner, I
Right.
got it now. Griner, Mr.
Yep.
Griner. Yes.
Kevin to Kevin.
Yes.
It's an interesting thought, that, a holistic person, I think what you're saying, Kevin, is makes you, better rounded, obviously, but it also leads you to be more tolerant, more open, in essence, more available to connect, with people who aren't like you. Do you think that is a part of practicing when we think about, how do we as individuals and how do we create, more um, openness to change, to diversity, to embracing other people? And then so that's part A of my question. Then part B is, you know, how do you talked about the Ukrainian situation right now, and nefarious forces basically exploit fear of the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fear of the foreign, misinformation, like all of those things become the enemy, from my standpoint, of tolerance, diversity, inclusion, and leads to conflict.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting in hearing, in Ukraine, one of the reasons that is cited by Russia, by Putin, about going in is to denazify
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine, which is, crazy, but it's
Yeah.
basically saying, hey, I'm on the side of the angels. As the guy who's going in and doing this, I'm on the side of the angels. I'm doing the work that needs to be done here, and it's being twisted. And so I wonder, sometimes I feel like, gosh, it's so easy to um, exploit others into, into, in essence, making them believe what you think, when it's, either it's evil, it's wrong, it's incorrect, it's factually inaccurate. And
Right.
how do we as individuals and a society, push back against those forces?
Mm. Wow. And Brother Griner, jump in if I didn't answer everything you just said, but you raised a lot of things that are triggering in a good way, because triggering can be good as well. Thoughts in my head. A few things come to mind. I'm just going to throw out some things that may be resources, because I also believe in also sharing things that I think are resources. Let's look at it like this. Let's go back to let's take it to Georgia. There was a man, white brother named Howard Zinn, who was teaching at Spelman College during the height of the civil rights movement. And Howard Zinn was deeply affected by what his students and folks around him were doing. He's one of our great historians. He was one of our great historians. We know that he ended up writing a book called The People's History of the United States. I believe, based on how he wrote that book and many interviews I've watched with Mr. Zinn, that he at some point felt like, he had a responsibility to be an interrupter, to be an interrupter, to be an interrupter, and that I need to be someone who's going to contribute to a holistic truth telling here. And so if you read the introduction to A People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn said, I want to write a history that was from the perspective of people who have been left out. Do you know what I mean? And I think you all can kind of gather who all those folks are, those types of folks are. And so I think that's a key thing, Brother Griner, is like, are we willing to be interrupters? Are we willing to be allies, in that kind of way? And everyone's space is different. You all are gas south. It could be inside this company. His space was history. My space is writing books in a different kind of way, but it's still my space. I think too, when I think about what you said, this other, and I'm trying to remember everything as best I can. Sadly, if we're honest, I think part of the reason why some folks are fighting back to Brother Camden's point about teaching holistic history, let's
Mhm.
call it that, since that other term seems to be such a buzzword for people, is
Mhm.
because then you begin to realize there's been a whole history of othering people. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, well, are we going to now say it's not just about not wanting to teach about Black history, about slavery, but are we going to admit that there has been high levels of anti-Italian American sentiment in this country, that there's been high levels of anti-Semitism in this country, that there's been high levels of, signs that said no Irish and no dogs, no Irish and no dogs, Chinese exclusionary laws. We can go on down a list of stuff. Well, how do you know this, Kevin Powell? Because I hashtag read, study, travel. I actually said I want to know this stuff. I want to know the whole history here. And don't even get me started about indigenous people, how they've been treated historically. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that, we have to make a commitment, Brother Grind, and everyone to being truth tellers. And I would even say, I even have a problem with the word I don't want to just be tolerated by people. I actually want to be respected. I want to be loved. I want to be respected. Even if you don't love me, I simply want to be respected as a human being. And I don't want to feel like the moment that I step out of my door, no matter what my identity or identities are, I can have damage done to me because of who I am. You know what I mean? And so when I think about tolerance or tolerate, I think that we're just kind of holding our breath, and I'll be glad when this Jewish person or this Black person or this woman or this queer person or this person or that person just gets out of here. When I say be interrupters, also have the courage not just to speak about yourself. Like, for example, I just read this amazing article about Francis Ford Coppola. He's one of my favorite filmmakers ever. Y'all know The Godfather 1 and 2. Apocalypse Now is probably the greatest film ever made about the Vietnam War. It's just incredible filmmaking, 3 years of making it. I did not know, and maybe some of y'all knew this, that after Godfather 1 and 2, there have been over 7,000 movies and TV shows that depict Italian Americans as mafia, as as gangsters. All I'm saying is, what does that mean to Brother Grinder's point, Kevin Powell, or any of us? What do I actually know about Italian American history? It's a simple question. If I actually believe that Black people are just rappers and ball players, what do I actually know about Black people? You know what I mean? Do I think that all Latinx people are just immigrants? All are immigrants? Well, guess what? I know folks who have been here for 3, 4, 5, 6 generations. You know what I'm saying? And outside of indigenous people and African people who are brought here as enslaved people, everyone else are in fact immigrants. Everyone else came from somewhere else through their free will or because they were escaping something, like the Irish were escaping the famine, literally, in Ireland, crawling on their bellies. And if we don't challenge this stuff, Brother Griner, people will tell us that the Holocaust never happened, that slavery never happened, the Trail of Tears for Native American indigenous people never happened. They'll tell you that what has happened to Chicano people, Mexican people, never happened. We can go on down a list of stuff. And so we may think this only has to do with Black folks, but it actually is really about all of us, because all of your history will be summarily erased.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a very good point, that, you look at critical race theory, and I think Camden brought this up. It's like, I can't imagine my kids not learning about the evils of slavery and the continued racism that exists in society, and sexism, and and anti-gay bias, and lots of things. And yet, it does feel like, at least some folks feel like, well, you know what, it's just too much for kids to learn. What are you going to learn if you don't learn that, from my standpoint?
And I love that you said that, Brother Griner, because that came up a lot when I was in Ohio this week. And my response was, well, what was actually real educational malpractice to me was being taught to hate myself the first 18 years of my life, because I didn't see myself in my history at all. That's actually far more destructive, because let's put it this way: people like me from my community were more likely to do harm to ourselves and to each other because of that profound self-hatred, because of the absence of knowing who we were, because it wasn't even a part of our education.
Yeah.
My mother trusted the school system to educate me, and the school system severely miseducated me. You know what I mean? And so I think people, if you really love children, then you would want children to be full, rich human beings. It's like, I do a lot of work with men and boys. I'll end it here, but Brother Grani made me think about a lot of stuff. A lot of men have been turned off by the Me Too movement. Let's just be real about it. A lot of us straight men, heterosexual men, are terrified. I understand it for a lot of reasons why, but a lot of the question that kept coming up, the thing that kept coming up from a lot of the male workshops I've done around the country, no matter what the race of the men, is they feel like women are trying to take something from them. That's the same thing with critical race theory, as if we're trying to take something away. What I've said to men over and over again is actually when I began to learn about half the country's population, women, and about half the world's population, women, it actually made me a better man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It made me change my vocabulary. It made me think about how I relate to women and girls. It made me understand why women and girls talk about, wanting to have safe spaces. It made me empathetic to women and girls who have survived sexual violence in some form. You know what I mean? It made me think about my mother in a different way, my aunties, my grandmother in a different way. I mean, I think we have to decide, you all, no matter how we identify ourselves, do you want to be someone who's a healer on this planet, or you just want to continue to help hurt the planet and hurt people? You know what I mean? I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to hate people. I want to love people. I want to love myself, and I want to love other people, which means I have a responsibility to keep learning, and keep growing for the
Oh,
rest of my
crap.
life. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
What's up?
Who's speaking?
I think it's Solomon, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it might just be someone that hasn't muted their mic, but I see Velvet's up next.
And I see Crystal's hand too. Hey, Crystal.
Hello. Thank you so much for being with us today. I read something the other day that
Hey,
it
Velvet.
said, can you guys can hear me, right?
Yes, I was just saying, hey,
Okay.
Velvet.
Hey,
What's
it
up?
says the people, and it was interesting that Kevin Greiner brought up kind of the critical race theory. It says the quote said the people who threw rocks at Ruby Bridges for trying to go to school are now upset that their grandchildren might learn that they threw
Mhm.
rocks at Ruby Bridges when she was trying to go to school. So it's this huge push,
Yeah.
to not teach what they are calling critical race theory, which I don't know is the right term for it. I like what you said, holistic history. I think that's a better term, a better phrase, and it would probably go over better with people if it was termed that. But it seems like it's this push to not uncover the truths of what has occurred in this country. And when like you said earlier, if you're an African American person and if you're in school and you've learned that your history started with slavery, think of the picture or the image that paints to you. You know nothing about your history in the motherland where, your ancestors were probably could have been kings or queens or warriors or whatever, that might be, to give you more of a sense of pride in your culture and your heritage and who you
Yes.
are. So
Yes.
my question to that is, what component do you think needs to be adjusted in the whole idea of critical race theory to make it more appealing or acceptable to have this as a part of curriculum in school? Like, there's so many sides of it, you know what I'm saying? And so many pros and cons of what should be taught, what should be kept out, or if it should even be taught. So my question is, what do you think will be the change or the thing that makes individuals say, you know what, I think this is what we need to do? It like, how should they approach it to where we can really make it a part of the curriculum in school?
It's a great question, Velvet. Thank you so much. As you were talking, Miss Velvet, I kept thinking about we just lost Desmond Tutu, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who a South African leader, who's as important to many of us as Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, and others who helped to end apartheid there. South Africa, as you all know or should know, did something really important in the 1990s. They had something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've never had that in America. You know, we've had a few opportunities, I believe, to really deal with these issues of othering people, as I believe Brother Griner or Brother Rob said. Someone said it. Revolutionary War period, creation of the Constitution, all of that stuff. And we know that that was dropped. The ball was dropped badly. It was dropped so badly that even working class whites rebelled against it. Look up Shays Rebellion if you don't know what I'm talking about. And we know how black folks were depicted as 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution. That language is still there to this day, 3/5 of a human being. The second opportunity was during the Civil War. The Civil War, there was that period from 1865 to 1877, after Lincoln was killed, after the Civil War was over, called Reconstruction. People dropped the ball there because it came back to power and privilege again. It keeps coming back to that. Civil rights movement was the third opportunity, to turn the tide. And I mean, again, I would not be sitting here. There would not be this diverse group of people here if it was not for the civil rights movement. Let's be honest about that. It's not like someone just said, okay, let's just get rid of the signs. Let's just give up civil rights and voting rights. It took literally the bulk of the civil rights movement, the heart of it was from 1955 to 1968, 13 years. But then almost immediately after Dr. King was killed and all the stuff that happened in the 60s was over, there became a massive backlash that we're still dealing with to this day. Why we're still talking about voting rights, as you all know, in 2022, which is absolutely insane. We had opportunities, I believe, around Barack Obama getting elected president. We had opportunities summer 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, the first summer of the pandemic, when Black Lives Matter exploded. You saw people of all backgrounds. It was multicultural, multi-generational, not just in America, worldwide. But the problem, Velvet, in my humble opinion, is that not enough people have been consistent in doing this work. The civil rights movement was consistent for 13 years at least. Mr. Berry knows what I'm talking about. Folks in Mississippi were committed. We're committed. We're committed to, fighting the good fight. And many of them will never know their names. We know the famous folks like Fannie Lou Hamer, but many folks' names we'll never know. And so it's going to take a massive effort, I feel, to say, hey, whether it's critical race theory or holistic history, we actually need to have honest conversations with our children about what this is. Otherwise, what we're basically handing to Camden Rob's child, his son, and all the kids that are coming up is our garbage, our trash. You know what I mean? Like, y'all take it. And we keep passing the buck. And so, that's what it's going to come to. And people in places like Georgia, Florida, you got to ask yourselves, is this okay to other people to depict people a certain kind of way, to say that certain things can't be said? Why is this happening? I think it's going to take people voting consistent. A lot of folks don't even participate in the political process at all. It's going to take people being organized in their communities. Mr. Berry knows where I come from. I'm an activist. That's part of my life work. That's how we got connected. Our mutual friends who work in that space. And it's like, you have to really be committed to bringing people together and saying, we're going to fight this good fight because this is for the betterment of this entire world. That's what it really boils down to. And that's what I would argue has to happen. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation, Miss Velvet, Brother Griner, everyone, because most of my talks this week have been with companies, with corporations this week, which is interesting, and it says to me that even at the levels of corporations now, companies, people realize something's got to shift here because this is not cool. This is just not cool what's happening. Why is it cool to see people literally shot on video and it becomes viral on social media? Why is that cool? When did that become accepted? Why is it cool to tell people what they can't learn about their own history? You know what I mean? I'm going to say to y'all very plainly again, I hated myself the first 18 years of my life because of what was left out of my education. I hated myself the first 18 years of my life, which means I hated my hair. I hated my nose. I hated my lips. I hated my body type. I hated my mother's body type. I hated people who looked like me because I didn't think that we were beautiful. I didn't think that we were handsome. I didn't think that we had anything to contribute to the world at all. And the moment I began to learn it when I went to college, and not because I went to college, because of certain things that existed in college, because of the civil rights movement, like a Black Studies program, you know what I mean? It put a battery in my back, as we say in the hip hop community. It boosted me up. And it was something that changed my life. It changed my life. And I want y'all to think about it like this. All these folks that are so resistant to holistic history or truth telling or truth and reconciliation or critical race theory or whatever you want to call it, think about everything that I've said in this program today. This is Black History Month. I could have very easily given a speech where I just talked about the world through the lens of me as a Black person, as a Black male. Did I do that? No. I talked about all kinds of people. You know what I mean? Because I also think that diversity, equity, and inclusion has to be intentional. It has to be intentional. And I really do believe that James Baldwin was right, that Dr. King was right, that Bell Hooks was right, that really love is the solution. The problem is that most of the people that we are talking about on the planet don't practice love.
Yeah,
That's
I was telling my my partner that or my ex-wife that it's almost like our country is resistant to like going to therapy.
Yes.
It's like you just kind of like acknowledge like, okay, well, we changed the laws, like you say, okay, everything's fixed, but you don't really focus on the problems, the things that are, systemic or deeper. You don't want to have those difficult conversations and look in the mirror and be like, okay, you know, I need to start with me and fix me, and then I can start, fixing others. Um, a lot of people are just kind of in denial. They're like, okay, the laws have been changed, everything's fixed,
Yeah.
right? And it's not, right?
No, it's not, Camden, because it's like, be it black folks with slavery and segregation, or Jewish folks with the Holocaust, or what, Mexican folks have had to deal with, or other Latinx communities, Puerto Rican folks, Dominican folks have had to deal with, or what Muslims have had to deal with, what women of any background have had to deal with, women of any background have had to deal with, women of any background have had to deal with, what disabled people have had to deal with. It's called trauma. It's called trauma. It's called trauma. You know what I mean? And so trauma just doesn't disappear. Like, if I can be really honest with you all, yep, I've been going to therapy my entire adult life because I needed to go to therapy. And like you, Camden, I've had marriages. I've had a marriage. I've had a divorce. I've had to deal with the trauma of growing up poor. I've had to deal with the trauma of dealing with racism. I've had to deal with the trauma of police community interactions. And those things are going to affect you. And then you have all the historical residue, all the stuff from the past, and then you got people telling you that you can't talk about the past. But in talking about the past, just the way Jewish folks say never forget about the Holocaust, what they're ultimately saying is if we forget this, we will be re-traumatized over and over again by these experiences, and also this stuff will happen again if we forget it.
Mm.
Make sense, y'all? So we have to talk
Absolutely.
about it.
And Kevin, we do have one last question left. I know that everyone, we're at the hour.
Crystal, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. We're going to get to the question. If you can stay on, we would
Yes,
love for you to hear that last question. But
absolutely.
I know Liz wants to take a photo of all of us that were here before some of you all have to jump off. If you can, please turn on your camera, and we'd love to just kind of capture this moment. So Liz, I'm going to hand that off to you for a moment.
Thank you. I'm doing the gallery view, so everyone's little heads are starting to populate. It's beautiful. Just
Hey,
1
Liz.
second, though.
I love all the cool eyeglasses in this.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
Y'all are wearing.
telling you, I love
Very
them
cool glasses.
too. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, everyone. You don't have to smile if you don't want to, but we're going to take a picture. 1, 2, 3. Okay, there was the one. And then I'm just going to do one more, just like with a different view. Okay. So just one more second. My little fingers can type fast enough to get me there. All right. Okay. We're going to do the large gallery view. Perfect. Okay. We're going to do one more. Everyone ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. That's it.
Oh, this was so interesting in a virtual environment. I haven't done that. Thanks, Liz. And yeah, so Crystal will go ahead and take your question. And thank you all for staying on if you can.
Thank you. Hey, Crystal.
Hello. And I don't think that my question, you kind of have chomped at my question a little bit with me waiting to get to ask it. So it may not be much to it. But what do you say to a person who is shy, scared, doesn't really know what to do as it relates to making a change or being different? I mean, of course, we've had protesting, we've had all these different things that have been happening over the past 2 years. And, some people are scared. Some people, and I know that we said, fear is this and fear is that. And that sounds good to people who are strong, but it doesn't sound good to people who are actually scared. So what do you say to someone who is scared and doesn't know where to start because of their fear, or because they're shy? don't like talking in front of people, don't really know, or they feel like they're not educated enough to have a conversation or a healthy back and forth conversation. They're afraid of people getting aggressive with them or whatever the case may be. What do you say to that person?
I say first and foremost, you are a genius. You are a leader. You're a genius. You're a leader. I say that first. I say two, your voice matters. Your voice matters. Your voice matters. I give a history lesson about a woman who was already in her 40s, who had came from a sharecropping family from Mr. Barry's home state of Mississippi, named Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer, who fought through her fear even after she had been physically assaulted, and became a dynamic voice, because I think when you start to speak, what do I say to people who are afraid? I was one of those people, Crystal. You're seeing me now doing all of this today, and this is what I do. I said nothing the first 18 years of my life. Nothing. I didn't think my voice mattered, and I was terrified of using it, or it would just come out in short bursts, and it would come out really fast, and then I'd go silent again, you know? I think that we have a responsibility to use our voices and know that you deserve to be here. This is your space too. You're also talking to someone, Crystal, me. I'm speaking about myself, who used to make myself invisible purposely. I'd have my hoodie on all the time, my baseball cap on all the time. I just didn't even want to be seen. And I just think, yeah, it could be a cliche to some people that fear is a prison, but I do realize I was living in a prison, a mental, emotional, spiritual prison, and I had to burst out of that prison. And it's the most incredible thing that's happened. I mean, I found my way because I started using my voice. It doesn't mean you have to be a big time speaker. You don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be some sort of political activist. I'm not saying that, but I think if if you don't say anything ever, you're basically saying that hurting is okay with you, and that should be unacceptable to any of us. No one should feel like they can just should go around. I mean, think about Seeley in The Color Purple. Think about that book and movie, how Mr. with his horrific sexism, overwhelmed her. And then when she finally found her voice, what it did, you begin to realize that Mr. was actually a very small person and Seeley was the big person. But you didn't get that until she started using her voice. Does that make sense, Crystal?
Yes, it does.
So I'm a big advocate for people using their voices. I mean, everyone's voice matters. Everyone's voice matters.
I agree.
Yeah. So Gas South, I love y'all. I thank y'all. Send me a t-shirt, please. No, I'm just kidding.
We'll
It's a cool
definitely
name for a
work on that.
company. I like it. Gas South.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin, Powell, and all of you all that came and attended and asked questions. As you can see, Kevin is all about the people. Please go and follow him. We might have to purchase your 14th, 15th, 16th book, Kevin. Thank you for bringing the information about education as the start of the foundation of work that we're doing here at Gas South and other companies all around. As you can see, we're engaged from the questions that you asked. So we just appreciate you. Happy Black History Month to all of us on the call on the heels of Women's History Month. And again, from the DEI team, we really thank all of you. And thank you, Kevin, for being a part of this presentation.
Thank y'all for having me. I hope to see y'all again soon. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Kevin.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Take care, everyone.
Alrighty.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kevin.